What's going on? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics, and up next we are going to talk about the top 10 surprising sales I saw last week. Stay tuned. Alright, so before we get started, please remember to hit that like button and hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. So this is a video where I go over the Heritage Weekly comic auction, and I've picked out the top 10 surprising sales that I saw this week from that auction. I pick 5 on the high side and 5 on the low side. So 5 that surprised me that overperformed and 5 that surprised me that underperformed. I think this just helps give an idea of where we're seeing some strength in the market right now, as well as where you can potentially come across some deals, because I think a lot of times people think that you can't find those discounted prices, and they're out there. You just gotta keep your eyes open for them, and eventually you might come across a few. Now, one other thing I just want to mention before I get started is I wanted to plug my buddy Jake's podcast, the Spec podcast, so I'll put the picture of it up there. He's actually got 3 great guests coming up soon, and so I recommend going and downloading that podcast, checking it out. It's Jake, who goes by Omega Red. It's spelled Omega_Reed on Instagram, as well as Jesus with Guaranteed Comics, also on Instagram. It's a lot of fun. I definitely recommend checking it out if you're at all interested in any type of comic material. It's not just speculation type videos. He interviews artists and writers and that kind of thing too, so a lot of fun. So with that, let's get into these top 10 sales. All right, now number 10 is a high sale. This is Ultimate Fallout number 4, where a CGC 9.8 sold for a record tying $3,840. Now, this is the first appearance of Miles Morales. This is the cover A. This is not the variant cover. And when I was watching this sale, this one was just ridiculous. The fact that it tied the high sale from months ago, earlier this year, and we've been seeing this book sell for $2,400 to $2,800 consistently now, and I can guarantee you it was available for less on eBay. This one just was really shocking. ETA Nick, on one of his recent videos, talked about that sale as well, because he said it just made no sense. And I don't know if this was some attempt at market manipulation, something like that, or if it was just somebody that wasn't aware of what current prices are, but it took 2 people. 2 people had to bid that book up. The thing with Heritage is that they do also have a lot of bidders that are international, that maybe can't get those books somewhere else, and so you have the possibility that you get some of these outlier type sales as well. It's hard to say. But I had estimated the price at $2,800 based on recent sales. This was 37% above that estimate. I do think this is a great book to own long term. I think there's no doubt about that they're going to use this character long term. It is a very popular book, very in-demand book, so I don't think it's a bad book to own, but like with anything, you can pay too much for something. And I think this was an example of paying too much, because it's also a relatively common book. It sells all the time. And so if you're just a little patient, if you see a book hitting numbers like that when you're bidding, just go find it somewhere else. That would be my recommendation for that one. Now, there are a lot of great alternatives for this book because there's lots of different prints. The one that I think is the best alternative if you don't want to get into this type of price range would either be to go for a lower grade. It does drop in price because it's a modern book. It drops in price pretty quickly. Or go for the second print that has the very similar cover, the cover that's showing his face. So that one, 9/8 are in the $500 to $550 range. They had been up around $1,000 earlier this year, so they've retreated quite a bit. But I think I had one that earlier this year I sold for maybe like $350. So even up at $500 or $550, it's still up quite a bit from where it was. It's still a strong book. Now, if you want to go the other side, if you want to spend more money, you can go pick up that variant cover, where on October 16th, a 9/8 sold for $30,900. I mean, that book is a big money book. Now, the 9/6s are quite a bit more affordable. They're down in the $8,000 to $9,000 range. Still, extremely expensive book. You could buy almost any Silver Age key at that type of money. So it's definitely something where I think you're taking on a little bit of risk, that demand is going to stay there at that level, But if you do want to spend some more money, you really believe in Miles Morales, that is another great option to pick up. All right, now number 9. This was a low sale, and it's just shocking to me whenever I see these books pop up as the low sales. This is Incredible Hulk number 180 with a CGC 7.0 that sold for $1,260. Now, this is the first time you see Wolverine in comics, whether you call it a cameo or whatever your stance is on it, doesn't matter. It's the first time you see him. 181 is the more expensive, more popular book, and I think it's going to stay that way. But I keep talking about these X-Men Wolverine keys and how they're coming down in price, and I personally think that it is great buying opportunities right now with those books coming down in price. I have definitely picked up a couple related books recently because of that. Now, I had estimated the price of this book at $1,650, and this was 24% below my estimate. The high sale was $2,355 back in May, so it's down 46% from that peak. Still up over 50% from where it was this time a year ago, but 46% discount from where it was at its peak, with arguably the most popular character in all of Marvel. When they eventually bring that character in, and they will, and there have been little teases and rumors recently that of who's going to be playing that character, I just see these books getting very expensive again. So I'd be looking into picking up these books while you can. I'm talking about books like Hulk 180, Hulk 181, Giant Size X-Men 1, those types of books. Because I think it is pretty crazy that those have dropped like this while other books are continuing up or have turned back up. So just think of this, I've talked about this quite a bit. A lot of times when people are buying comics, they're very short-sighted on the future of these characters, and they only buy the thing once that character has been confirmed, or you see them in a trailer, that kind of thing, and by then it's too late. So yes, if you buy them, they could continue to drop a little bit more, but it is a book or a set of books that I think are great to own long term. Now, this is already the alternative for Hulk 181, so personally, I would just go with 180 if you can. Otherwise, if that's still a little too expensive, because even in low grades, you're still going to be spending a few hundred to maybe $500-$600 for that book, I would look at a book like Wolverine #1 from the limited series. That one's been coming down in price quite a bit as well. It's still pricing a 9.8. It's around $800 to $900 in a 9.8, but down from over $1,300. But outside of a 9.8, it is very affordable. Just a few hundred in the 9s and less than $100 outside of the 9s. So that's where, if those big keys get a little too expensive, just start looking at those alternative keys like Wolverine #1. And for Wolverine, there's a bunch of other options as well for that character. All right, now number 8, and this is a high sale. And I finally get to talk about a high sale for X-Men, because X-Men has been so weak for so long. This was X-Men #9 with a CGC 6.5 that sold for a record $1,200. Now, I am a big fan of this book. I have a few copies of this book. I think the crossover with the X-Men and the Avengers is something that's inevitable, something that's going to happen. Plus, it's just early X-Men. It's X-Men #9. It's within the first 10 issues. Never bad books to own, regardless, whether as a collector or somebody who's looking to sell books. I think they are great books to own. Now, I had estimated the price of this book at $850. This was 41% above that estimate. Now, this was a white pages copy, so that can sometimes contribute to those higher sales, those bigger sales. But regardless, this was a very strong sale for that book, especially one that's been dropping in price some. Now, the prior record was $1,100 on June 19th, so it even beat that prior record by 9%. For alternatives, personally, I wouldn't go for any other book. I would go for this book. It's key for that first meeting. And once you get out of the mid to higher grades, I mean, it is a Silver Age book, early book, it does get more affordable. You could get a nicer presenting 2.0, 3.0 type book for a few $100s, and that's what I would go for. But again, it is in the first 10 issues of X-Men. It's not ever going to be extremely cheap, but I think it is a cool book to own. I love the cover art on this one, just a great book with the potential with the MCU. All right, now number 7, this is a low sale, and The snapping back and forth of some of these books is always a little bit surprising, because this was Amazing Spider-Man #1 with a CBCS 3.5 and a CGC 1.8 that both had low sales. The CBCS 3.5 sold for $12,600 and the 1.8 CGC sold for $7,200. And this was a book that just a few weeks ago I talked about with a high sale, where there was a 2.0 that sold for $13,000. It was a nice looking 2.0. It was still a 2.0. And this week we have a 3.5 CBCS that sold for less than that 2.0. Now, granted, it's CBCS. They do tend to sell for a little bit less, regardless of your opinion on that subject. But the 1.8 CGC also went for significantly below that 2.0 price. Now, personally, I think whoever picked up that 3.5 CBCS got a steal. I would have bought that book if I had 13 grand or so sitting around, because I had estimated that book at about $17,000, sold for 26% below my estimate, and it's a nice looking book. I took the time to take a close look at that book after the sale just to see if maybe there was something wrong with it, and it looks nice. I think if it got cracked out and resubmitted to CGC, it would at a minimum get a 3.5, if not a 4. And so I think that's very likely what that person is going to do, because they will instantly see that boost in value. Now, for the 1.8, I had estimated it at $11,000 based on that $13,000 sale a couple weeks ago. That sold 35% below my estimate. So again, think a book that somebody got a really good deal on, especially with what we've been seeing with Amazing Fantasy 15. Now, I did talk about this with some of these high Amazing Spider-Man 1, Amazing Fantasy 15 sales that we've seen. It's felt very frothy, where we're seeing these huge, just straight up spikes in prices, and that's what we saw earlier this year with other books. We're seeing it now with Amazing Fantasy 15 and Amazing Spider-Man 1. So I would be cautious with them. I think there are going to be opportunities to pick up those books at quite a bit below some of these really high peak sales that we've seen recently. So remember, even if it's a major key like this, don't get caught up too much in those bidding wars. You can find them for discounts. If you remain patient, the opportunities come up, but you just have to make sure you bid when that chance comes. All right, now number 6, and this is a high sale, and this one is also going to be a little bit of a warning about things that you need to make sure you look for when you're buying books. This was Detective Comics number 298 with a CGC 7.5 that sold for $1,320. Now, this is the first Silver Age appearance of Clayface. I believe his first appearance is in Detective Comics 40, which is also the first cover appearance of Joker. But this book has been really hot lately. I'm not exactly sure why. If somebody knows why in the comments, they can let me know. But this sale still jumped out as very strong. And like I said, I'm going to talk about why this one should come as a bit of a warning, because you can see this is an old label CGC book. And a lot of people have this mentality that if you buy an old label CGC book, you can always crack that book out, get it pressed and cleaned, resubmit it, and get a higher grade. And while that is more often true than not, at least for a while, that's not always the case. And so you do really need to evaluate a book on a case-by-case basis. Now, the reason people feel that way is that pressing and cleaning books wasn't done back when those labels, or at least wasn't commonplace, back when CGC was grading those books in the early 2000s. But it is now, and so the thought is you can clean that book, press that book, and get a higher grade. But let's take a closer look at this book. The first thing, just on the label notes itself, it says the top staple is detached on this cover. And now, at least according to the grading standards that are provided by ETA Nick for what he has seen from CGC for a decade, that would make the maximum grade that this book would get if you submitted it today a 6.0. And so if you crack this book out and submit it back with a detached top staple, you are very likely, just because of that one flaw, to get a 6.0 no matter how good that book looks. And if it was a really beautiful book, you'd probably get a qualified label. And so a lot of people don't want that green label, that qualified label. But if we actually look closer at this book, I honestly think this book was overgraded at a 7.5, even if that top staple was attached. You can look at the top right corner with multiple creases and a couple little missing pieces. The right edge has a long thumb crease from reading the book. There's a chip out of the bottom right corner, among other things like spine ticks and so on. So I honestly would not be surprised if this person cracks this book out, if that's their plan, and resubmits it, that they get a 6.0. And even if it had that top staple attached, I'd say maybe it tops out around a 7. And so if the person who bought this book watches my channel, I would leave that book where it is. I would not take that book out of that slab. But this is just my warning that, yes, you can crack out books and get them pressed and cleaned and get the grades improved, but that is not always the case. And you need to make sure you check the book on a case-by-case basis. But back to the sales numbers for this book, I had estimated the price at $875, assuming it was a 7.5. And this was 51% above that estimate. The prior record was $800, but there have been some bigger sales recently in other grades, and so that's why I estimated it at $875. But this is my warning, keep that book in that slab. I wouldn't even resubmit it to get re-slabbed, because they will reevaluate books. If you submit them just for re-slabbing to get a new case, I wouldn't even do that if I was the owner of that book. Now, I wouldn't go for any alternatives for this book. This is already the alternative for Clayface's first appearance in Tech 40. I would just aim for a lower grade. It is a relatively tough book to come across, but I would still just aim for a lower grade and get that first Silver Age appearance. All right, now number 5. This is a low sale. This is XMen #1 with a CGC 1.8 that sold for $5,880. So yeah, I did get to talk about a high sale for X-Men in this video, but there is also a very low sale. Now, obviously this book doesn't need a ton of introduction. It is the first appearance of the X-Men. It is the first appearance of Magneto. And this book was one of the big books to jump earlier this year. It spiked a ton, was up 200, 300% over the course of about a month. But it has definitely cooled off. I think this book specifically also suffers from having a very obvious cover flaw. It's missing that chunk out of the upper right-hand corner. If that had been on the back, I think this book would have probably sold for quite a bit more, because it is a nice copy in terms of colors. It has very bright colors. It has that dark green corner box where you can have different printing variations with this book where it's either a light green or a dark green, and most people prefer that dark green. But I had estimated the price of this book regardless at $8,000. This was 27% below my estimate. Prior record on May 1st for a 1.8 was $10,500. So this is a drop of 44% from that high. So again, I'm talking about a few big Silver Age books in this video, and you can see that if you're patient, you do have the opportunity to pick these books up for discounts from those highs when you see things go a little crazy, a little fast. However, I think the X-Men will eventually be introduced in more than just the X-Men 97 cartoon that was talked about in the latest Disney Plus day. So when they do ultimately bring in the mutants, bring in Wolverine, those types of characters, I expect to see these books jump in price again. Now, for alternatives, because even if the prices come down more, this book is extremely expensive. You're going to spend thousands of dollars. A good option is the second appearance of the X-Men in X-Men #2. This is long been an overlooked book. It's not the best cover, and so I think that's one of the things that hurts it a little bit, but it's still not cheap. It's still the second appearance of the X-Men, second book in that run. A 1.5 sold for $515 on October 6th, and a 4.0 sold for $1,025 on October 16th. So it's an expensive book, but it's more than 10 times less expensive than the X-Men #1 equivalent. And if you see those characters come in, it's very likely this book is going to move up just as much in terms of percent as X-Men #1. So if you're looking at it from an investment perspective, you can buy this book, you can have an investment in the X-Men, and you don't have to put down thousands of dollars. All right, now number 4, this is a high sale. This is Avengers #43 with a CGC 9.6, tying the record at $5,040. Now, I thought this was a cool book to see a big sale for, because we'd really seen drop-offs in this book after the Black Widow movie. Because it's just one of those things. It's what happens. The books spike leading up into the movies, and then after they show up, people just don't buy the books as much, and the prices tend to drop. But he was he was a really good character in that movie, and he's not dead. So I feel like there's a very good possibility that because of how popular he was, that we could see him again at some point in the future, whether it's in a Disney Plus show or in something in the MCU. I could see that happening, and I think that would be something fun that Disney could do or Marvel could do. So like I said, this tied the record from all the way back in 2019, and that was likely when he was first announced or teased for this movie, but I had estimated the price at $2,800. This was 80% above that estimate. Now, this book, like I said, had just tanked in price after that movie. So yes, it had a record of 5,040 back in 2019, but in 2020, it had a sale of 2,494. And so I gave it a little bit of a bump above that 2020 sale because of just the spikes in prices that we had seen this year. But because that movie had already come out and we had seen the prices dropping in other grades, that's why I just gave it a little bit above, around $2,800. But definitely, to me, this was a very strong sale for that book. And we are continuing to see strong sales for what are the higher end books. In this case, this isn't a extremely popular or in-demand book, but it is a rare high-grade copy of a Silver Age key. Now, again, for alternatives for this book, you definitely don't need to get a different book. You can just shift down to lower grades. A 7.5 sold on November 10th for $325, and a 5.0 sold for $200 on October 30th. So for just a few $100s, you can buy a nice presenting copy of that book. You can get a nice presenting copy in a mid-grade where it doesn't have any big creases or anything like that. So if you like that character in that movie, you think there's the chance that they might bring him back, or you just want to add that book to your collection, I would say just go for that book. Don't go for any alternatives. All right, now number 3. This is a low sale. This is Batman number 423 with a CGC 9.8 that sold for $1,800. Now, we've really noticed that the shine on the Todd McFarlane books has really started to come off. The prices on a lot of those books have declined over the last few months. We were seeing huge records in a lot of what I'll call the Todd McFarlane keys. The key covers are just key issues that he's associated with, like Amazing Spider-Man 300, Amazing Spider-Man 316, Hulk 340, and Batman 423, among others. And that's really what is popular for this book. It's Todd McFarlane drawing Batman, and it's Batman kind of looking like Spawn. And so you have that crossover with Spawn, and you have Todd McFarlane drawing one of the most popular characters in the world. And so that had really driven up the prices of this book over the last year or so. Now, I had estimated the price at $2,500. This was 28% below that estimate. The high was actually $2,700, and that was just on September 2nd. So that high was pretty recent, but in the grand scheme of things, this was a very affordable book. Prior to 2020, this was about a $500 book, and even in 2020, it peaked at $1,250. So over the last year, it's gone up over 100%, and over the last couple years, it was up over 300, 400%. Now, even at these prices, it's still up around 300%. So I'm not saying that it hasn't performed well, that kind of thing. It's just that it is down from its peak. And I could see this book continuing to drop some more. So if you are looking to get into a 9.8 for this book, to pick up a 9.8 for this book, I would maybe be a little more patient and just wait and see what happens with the prices on this one. For alternatives, there's not really a direct alternative for this book. I mean, this is Todd McFarlane drawing Batman, and so if that's what you want, this is the book you need to get. There are multiple prints, so you could get one of the later prints that's a little more affordable, but even in mid-grades, it's not that expensive. It's about $100 to $200 book in the 8s, and so you could get a copy of this book and not have to spend thousands of dollars, so that's probably the path I would go. But I did mention earlier a number of other McFarlane famous covers, so if that's what you're going after, I would go for something like Amazing Spider-Man 316, which is the first cover appearance of Venom, which has dropped in price quite a bit as well, and Hulk 340, which is that cover with the Wolverine battling the Hulk, just one of the most famous Wolverine covers of all time. I would go after that book because, again, that's another book that's kind of an alternative key for Wolverine that when he comes back, I could easily see that book spiking in price again. So both of those good options if Venom eventually is brought back in again, which I'm sure he will be, and if Wolverine is eventually cast, any news around that will spike the Wolverine-related keys. All right, now number 2. So this was the most surprising high sale that I saw. This was a monster book. This was all select #1. It's a Golden Age book. This is a CGC 4.0 that sold for a record $22,800. Now this is a cool cover. It's an awesome cover. You've got the big three of the Golden Age on there for Marvel. You've got Captain America, Submariner, and the Human Torch. They're fighting Nazis at one of Hitler's castles. It's an Alex Schomburg cover from 1943, and it's a #1. So this book has just everything going for it. But this was still a massive sale. And this is what I've been talking about with these Golden Age books. I keep seeing strength in Golden Age books. I had estimated the price of this book at $12,000. So it still wasn't a cheap book, but this beat that estimate by 90%. And to put that in perspective, the prior record for this book was $4,403 in 2017. So in 4 years, that book went from a $4,400 book to a $22,000 book. And the reason that I had put the price at $12,000 was that in just April of this year, a 3.5 sold for $10,199. And so you can see that this was a really, really strong sale. And that's one of the things I've been seeing with Alex Schomburg World War II covers, especially ones that have Captain America on them. Those books have been just through the roof over the last 3 to 4 months. Every time I see one of those books come up for sale, they're just setting records. And that's something I think maybe people that aren't looking at Golden Age books all the time aren't really aware of. One of the things that with Golden Age books is that you'll see that their prices have generally been pretty flat for a long time. You wouldn't see big jumps. Even if you wouldn't have a sale for many years, you would see the same price in 2012 as 2017. There would be barely any shift in the price of those books, but that has changed over the last year or so. The prices in Golden Age books have just gone up a lot, and so it's been a big shift for those books. Now, for alternatives, the All Select run does get a little more affordable as you move later on in a couple later issues. So you could go that route. You're not going to have to spend $22,000, but you're still going to probably be in the thousands, especially if you've got something with Captain America on it and if you've got an Alex Schomburg cover. So if you do want Alex Schomburg books, I've mentioned this a number of times in the past, look for books from the runs that are after World War II. If you get outside of World War II, outside of that type of content, especially ones where they're fighting Nazis or Hitler, then you can find them for a little bit more affordable prices. You can get under $1,000, but if you have that type of content, be ready to spend a bunch of money. You're going to be spending over $1,000 almost for any grade copy. All right, so now for #1, the most surprising low sale. And in terms of cost, this is going on the complete opposite side of the spectrum because this was Conan the Barbarian, #24, with a CGC 9.2 that sold for $384. So we were at $22,000, now we're down at a few $100s. But this is a show that you can have these big swings in prices in the lower price books as well as the higher price books. Now, this is the first cover appearance of Red Sonja. It's also considered her first full appearance, but it's a little weird. 23, they generally call her first appearance, and then 24, her first full. They don't call 23 a cameo, so I'm not exactly sure how to interpret that, but 23 is the more expensive book. It is a case where, unlike Hulk 180 and 181, where 181 is the more expensive book and it's the cover, in this case, 23 is actually the more expensive book and she's not on the cover. But I don't know why certain things happen the way they are. It's just the way books play out over time with collectors. Now, this book had spiked a ton earlier this year when they announced the Red Sonja movie. Personally, I don't have very high hopes for that movie, and so I think other people probably don't as well, which is why the prices are coming down. However, I do think that it's likely the prices will spike when a trailer comes out, but I just don't have a real strong long-term belief in that. But I had estimated the price of this book at $600. This was 36% below that estimate. It had peaked at $850 back in May, so it's down 55% from that peak. Now, this might not be a bad time to look into getting into this book again if you're looking for a copy. This had generally been going for about $250 to $300 last year, and so it's only up around 20 to 30% since then, and with the price changes that we've seen over the last 6 to 8 months, I'd say this is probably a decent time to pick up that book if you can get it for a price like this. So these are the types of buying opportunities that I'm talking about all the time if you're looking to buy and sell comics. I think this was probably a great pickup by whoever bought that book in preparation for that movie eventually coming out, because I would expect the prices of these books to jump again as that movie comes out, as we get that first trailer. But I wouldn't keep that book long term unless it's just a book you wanted to have in your collection. That is definitely one that I would look to sell when that trailer comes out. Now, again, this is a book that I don't think you really need to have an alternative for. It is a much more affordable book. It's obviously, if a 9.2 is going for $384, something in the mid grades you can get probably around $100 or less. If you want to get other Red Sonja keys, I'd say the main two I would go for are Conan the Barbarian 23 and 24. I wouldn't really go for her other books, the first solo series and the first solo story, that kind of thing. I would focus on these books because they're the bigger keys and they are already relatively affordable. So they're the ones that I would recommend buying. All right, so that was the top 10 most surprising sales I saw this week. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I've got more videos over here that you can watch. I've got the subscription button right here. If you'd like to subscribe to the channel, I would really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next video.